right, guys, welcome back to the Standing for Freedom Center. I'm joined by a Liberty grad. That means he's coming back home when we do an interview. And we've done several, but it's Cabot Phillips, co-host of the Daily Wire, Morning Wire.
Yep, Morning Wire podcast.
That's amazing. You guys are doing incredible. And by the way, you're like in a top 10 category right now. Most downloads. People come in, check in with what you're doing all the time, appreciate what you're doing. I do want to talk about, just real quick, you mentioned before we even started, just the number of Liberty grads that are working at Daily Wire and elsewhere in media.
It's been amazing. I graduated Liberty in 2014. I got into DC, and one of the most encouraging things was already seeing this network of Liberty grads.
Yeah.
And they told me that on the promotional materials before I went to Liberty. They said, we'll help you get a job afterwards. I didn't really believe them. And then I graduated, and I met all of these Liberty graduates around the country. 10 years later, the number of people that I meet, it's order of magnitude above that. The number of Liberty people in places of influence who not only help the movement more broadly, but help bring other Liberty grads behind them into the space. It's been so encouraging. We have a number of Liberty grads working at Daily Wire. Everywhere I go around the country, I meet people that are affiliated with the Liberty family. And that's what it is. It's a family. It's people helping each other grow. And the values that Liberty instilled, it's conducive to making a difference in the country. And I see it happening all around the country.
Hey, man, that's awesome. I have to piggyback off of that. The importance of biblical worldview in education and everything that we do. A lot of times, you know, in the past, people try to treat education separate from, say, evangelism. You know, like, hey, we're just going to evangelize. We'll do the Great Commission, but we send our kids off to school wherever. And, you know, they're going to make it out all right. They're just planning for their careers, jobs, that kind of thing, preparation for further education. But more and more, we're realizing that there is no value-neutral worldview out there. Everything matters, especially when it comes to the classroom. Like, it does matter what specific ideology and worldview is being promoted in that classroom. Talk a little bit about that.
I think there's a misconception first that a lot of Christians have where they think, if I'm not a pastor, then I am just working as a professional. I'm just a parent, and that's who I am. And yes, I'm also a Christian. But our vocation, what God calls us to, should influence us in whatever professional realm we're in, whether we're in parents. We should be Christian lawyers. We should be Christian media personalities. We should be Christian teachers. Like, that should influence everything we do. And understanding we have our own worldview, which is the correct worldview based on biblical truth. That doesn't mean that others aren't bringing their worldview into their profession. And if we simply say, well, in my professional career, I don't want to bring my worldview into all of this. I'll keep that for when I'm at home or when I'm at church. We are leaving a vacuum that will be filled by worldviews that do not believe in truth, that believe that you can create your own truth, that believe all of these false ideologies. And we're essentially conceding the worldview to them and saying, well, you can bring your leftist or your cultural, your secular worldview into your job. I won't bring it into my job. That is a failure of leadership on our part as Christians. We should say, I'm going to bring my worldview into these places because the world is better for it and because we're commanded to do so by Christ. And I think when it comes to education, it's the same thing. For too long, conservatives and Christians have ceded that ground to the left, saying, well, education, yeah, there's a leftist secular twinge to it, but it's not that bad. I think people are waking up and realizing what happens when you have decades and generations of people being taught all of these things contrary to our own worldview. It should motivate parents and lawmakers and Christians as a whole to say, we have to jump into this space. There's a fire.
Yeah.
I'm not going to run away. There's kids in there. I'm going to run towards the fire.
Totally. And as you see it springing up everywhere in education. People recognize the cultural moment that we're in. And so they're trying to provide alternatives. Like you have homeschooling revolutions happening right now by the millions. People who are leaving public school, going into homeschooling or private schools, online education, you name it. And it's because of this. Talk a little bit about, I know there's a lot of things y'all report on Daily Wire. Really appreciate you getting news out there as an alternative source to mainstream media. But obviously there's a liberal bias in the media today. It seems like unless you're willing to go outside of the, this is on cable, or this is your traditional whatever, mainstream media, your big four, if you will, Fox, ABC, NBC, and CBS, you're going to get propaganda. You have to go outside of that. You have to go sometimes behind a paywall, right? I'm a Daily Wire subscriber. I really appreciate the reporting that you guys do, but talk a little bit about the bias that you're seeing and then the freedom of speech that obviously is under threat in this country.
I'll give you an example of the bias. The leftist fact-checking apparatus that they've created. So around 2016, when President Trump got in office, the media companies coordinated with social media companies to say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to crack down on misinformation and disinformation. Their definition of misinformation is not just something that's a falsehood. If we at Daily Wire reported something that was false, more power to a fact checker coming in and saying, hey, this number is wrong. This is a falsehood. We're going to let people know about that. That's what the media should be doing. We should be holding each other accountable. Their definition of misinformation can be facts that are true by definition as a fact, but it's something they don't like. It's a narrative that they don't appreciate, that doesn't help them, and they will say that's misinformation. So one thing these fact checkers do is they will put together reports of who are the credible news outlets. Yeah. These fact checkers then have partnerships with advertisers around the country. They'll go to these advertisers and say, hey, we noticed that you're advertising on this conservative website. Did you know that they have a C- rating on our fact checking system? There aren't any actual real inaccuracies. It's incredibly limited. They give us a C- because they say, look at all this misinformation. They put pressure on advertisers to say, don't advertise on these networks, or we're going to let the world know that you're partnering with fake news organizations. And then that draws money away from alternative outlets and conservative outlets that are actually telling the truth. And the only people left that are getting all of that institutional support are the mainstream media outlets that have the blessing of big tech, the blessing of the DOJ and the government deep state, if you will. And those are the people that end up profiting in the long run. That's a subtle and insidious thing that they are doing that a lot of Americans are not aware of. And it's a way that they try and control the funnel of information.
Yeah, big pharma. The millions of dollars big pharma pumps into advertising to push, and ironically enough, when you're watching, like let's say you're watching the NBA Finals or you're watching the Super Bowl or something, and you see some ad for some pharmaceutical drug. Most consumers do not buy drugs that way. What ends up happening is they're buying into and controlling the information in mainstream media. So they're going to pay millions and millions of dollars for these ads in order to later, when it comes along, whether it's COVID or whatever, and say, you know what, we want you to push this information and not that information. And otherwise, we're going to pull advertising from you guys. Crazy.
That's exactly what they do. I think COVID was a wake-up call for a lot of people when it comes to media. And I think people saw with their own eyes what was happening during COVID. And then they saw what was being reported in the media and the hysteria that was being spread and the lies that were told about COVID vaccines and so many other elements of the pandemic. And people said, well, wait a second. This isn't accurate. I can see with my own eyes what's going on here. And I think that did drive a lot of people to seek out alternative news sources, to seek places that were actually going to tell them the truth that they were seeing with their own eyes. I do think COVID was a turning point for all the negatives that came with it.
Yeah.
One of the positives was that people became more skeptical of what their leaders were telling them and what the media was telling them.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about the immigration crisis, the border, how that's really impacting the country. There's a rise in crime. You see it especially in the inner cities. And places like California and New York, that they're not tough on crime, immigrations are gaming the system, the legal system, the justice system.
I think the average American knows that there is a border crisis going on, but the average American is not aware of the depth of that crisis. Since President Biden took office, when President Biden took office, deportations were at a I need to start that over. Sorry about that. When President Biden took office, border crossings were at a multi-decade low under President Trump. President Biden comes into office, sends a message to the world. We're not going to be inhumane anymore. We're not going to defend our border. Come on in. We'll welcome you with open arms. What has happened since then? 7 million people have crossed our border illegally. That we know of. The real number is closer to 10 or 11 million. If you put 7 million people and gave them their own state, that would be the 14th largest state in America. Those are people that are coming here. We do not know who they are. In many cases, they do not share the same cultural values that we have. They are coming here expecting the government to support them. And why wouldn't they expect that? Because that's what President Biden is telling them. And we know what the long-term plan is. Years ago, you might have called it a conspiracy theory to say that they want to open the borders to bring new voters in. We now know they're doing that. President Biden is now considering legislation that would offer citizen status to hundreds of thousands of people living here legally if they've been in the country a certain time, if they're married to an American citizen. They know, or they believe, that that will create a new blue voter base for them. This is all ideological in nature, and they are doing it at the expense of the American people. And you see that because they don't care about crime levels rising. They think we're willing to put up with a 50% increase in violent crime, a 90% increase here in DC in carjackings. Because yes, that might be bad, but in the long run, we're going to bring more voters in, people who we think we can get to support our cause because we're giving them all this free stuff. It is a evil thing that they're doing, and the American people need to wake up and understand, just because you're not in a border state does not mean that you will not be impacted in the long term by this. And one more stat when it comes to immigration. President Biden loves to talk about the jobs reports, and he says unemployment is at a record low. We've added more jobs than any president since, in the modern era. If you actually look at the numbers, which you've done at Morning Wire, if you look at the numbers on who's getting those jobs, since 2020, the net job growth for American citizens and American-born citizens is negative. There are fewer American-born citizens with jobs today than there were in 2020. All of the net job growth has gone to foreign-born workers, either people who came over here in the last few years, people who were not born in America, many of them coming here legally, but the vast majority of them coming illegally. The only net job growth we've seen since 2020 is from people who were not born in America. That is not America first. That is not our legislators putting the American people first. That's a travesty that the American people should be aware of, and it should end.
No, that's very, very well said. When you think about the fact that, people who are born here legally have been citizens, you look at the polling data among minorities, Black Americans, Latino Americans, they hate this border policy because they understand that it is hurting them, right? We were just talking to Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson just the other day. A lot of blue collar workers, they're looking at their wallet and they're saying, how am I going to afford to put gas in the tank and afford to pay my bills, right? And then yet the jobs, and these are the entry-level jobs, are being taken away from Americans. So there's not a lot of opportunity there. And then it also creates a whole demographic of forgotten Americans where at the end of the day, they don't have opportunity and they believe in government assistance because they can't go out in the marketplace and go find a job.
And what are those people who are upset about that reality told?
Yeah.
If they express anger over the fact that their jobs are being taken, what are they called? They're called xenophobic.
Yeah.
You're called anti-immigrant. You're called bigoted. There's nothing bigoted about saying, I live in America. I have a blessing to be here as an American citizen. I would prefer my government to care more about my job and my family and my household than someone who came here and broke our laws a year ago. And if you look at the numbers also, so much of the data has shifted when it comes to immigration. The majority of Americans now, over 60% in a recent NBC poll, said they support deportations of people coming to the country illegally. In the year 2004, that number was 19%. We've seen a tripling of the number of Americans saying, you know what? It's time to enforce our border. If you come here illegally, we're going to send you back. That's not anti-immigrant. That's pro-American. That's looking out for the people in your community. Even the majority of Hispanic and Latino voters, 53%, said they support deporting people who came here the wrong way. You are insulting hardworking American Hispanics and Latinos, hardworking American immigrants who came here the right way. You are insulting them by saying, we're going to give the same treatment to the people who jumped the line and did it the wrong way. I think we need to honor the commitments we've made to hardworking immigrants who came here the right way and honor the commitments we've made to the American people in our country.
Well said. God bless you, Cabot Phillips. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure to be with my Liberty family.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, stick around. We'll be back with more. Hey, did you find this helpful? I hope you did. Please like and subscribe, share with a friend, and also go to standingforfreedom.com where you can find more content, articles, podcasts, and our Theology of Politics series, all at standingforfreedom.com.